Have you ever felt like there's something more to life than what you're currently doing?
Do you see the world differently than everyone around you?
Do you ever dream of achieving big things but feel stuck? We're Tiffany and Sid, and we are the Cycle Breakers.
Not long ago, no one believed in us.
The people closest to me said I'd make a great receptionist.
And mine completely abandoned me and left my life.
We started our journey 5 years ago in a basement.
Now, we live our dream life in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. But how did we get here?
We saw a life that was much better than the one we were living.
And broke through the blocks that hold most people back.
Like self-sabotage, crippling self-doubt, and the fear of rejection. But we knew we were made for more, so we bet on ourselves to make the life that we wanted.
And jumped into a life dedicated to breaking old cycles and patterns.
And now we live on 97 acres in the Smoky Mountains. We travel the world speaking on stages, and we help a small army of people break their cycles as well.
We're the Cycle Breakers, and we break through blocks that are holding most people back so we can go live our dream life.
Welcome to the Cycle Breakers Show.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cycle Breakers Show. And we are here because we want to help people when it comes to clearing the blocks that are holding them back so that they can go out there and get over things like stress, overwhelm. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about toxic relationships that typically hold people back. Now, this episode is near and dear to my heart, mainly because I was in a lot of toxic relationships. And if you don't know who we are, my name's Sid Clevinger, and I'm here with my amazing and beautiful wife,
Tiffany Toombs, Clevinger.
Took her a second, but she got there. And we're the Cycle Breakers. And if it's your first time to this show, welcome. We're super excited that you're here. And this show is all about helping people break their cycles and their negative patterns and the things that are holding them back so that they can go out there and start building a life that they can't wait to wake up to, and what we call their dream life. And, you know, it really happened for us, and mainly because of what we're going to be talking about today, toxic relationships. I think in both of our stories, as well as our together story, the story of us breaking the cycle while we were together, it all kind of came, you know, there were toxic relationships all over the place, you know, like whether it comes from your ex, huge toxic person. I'm just going to say it, huge toxic person when it comes to your ex. You know, or it comes to my ex, huge toxic girl, like that the girl was nuts, right? Or it even comes to like big things, like, you know, I mean, I joke around about that stuff, but you know, like it's no joking matter. I mean, like we were both really in toxic relationships that were holding us back. And even though we knew they were bad, we allowed ourselves to stay in them. And that's kind of what we want to talk about today, because really the tail end of this, you know, is, you know, we talk about exes and we talk about, you know, mine was an ex-wife, hers was an ex-fiance. But then we got to start talking, you know, get real here and talk about family. And, you know, for us, we had to break free from toxic relationships in our family. And sometimes for people, that's really, really scary. So, Tiffany.
Yeah.
Let's talk about toxic relationships, and let's, you know, I think, you know, with this episode, I know we're talking about how to know if you're in a toxic relationship. So like, what would be signs that you would say that, you know, I mean, I definitely got mine and we can talk about them, but like, what would you say were signs, kind of like in hindsight, what would you say were signs that you were in a toxic relationship? And then why did you, while even seeing those signs or possibly not seeing those signs, like what kept you going inside that toxic relationship and not just willing to like let go?
Yeah. And I just want to say that, you know, sometimes this topic can seem like a no-brainer. Like, of course, I'm going to know it's a toxic relationship. And, you know, the ones that are more abusive in whatever way, sexual, financial, physical, mental, emotional, that can be a little bit more obvious. Financial and mental, emotional, not always so obvious.
You say that, but I mean, like we interviewed Marley on here and we talked about her divorce, and like she talked about how it was kind of a slow process for her. Like she kind of knew, she didn't know, she didn't want to let go. It really took like some pretty heavy stuff that happened before she was really able to say like, no.
Yeah. So this is where I'm saying like the mental, emotional abuse doesn't tend to be as obvious to people. Mm-hmm. And then the other side of it is, you know, there's a type of relationship called ambivalent relationships, which we'll talk about shortly, that are hugely toxic that people don't even know about. And I want to talk about later how that affects you. But to get to your question, I didn't realize my relationship was toxic because there was a couple things happening in my relationship. Number one, most of the toxicity that was happening was lies, and I didn't know they were lies, right? So I believed everything that I was being told because I had no reason not to. He was a very stealth liar. If we're in the case of my ex,
Would
he
you
was a
say
very
no,
stealth
like,
liar.
you think that's like common for narcissistic behavior?
Yeah, I don't even know that he was a true narcissist, to be honest. I think that word gets thrown around a lot when it's not necessarily true. People who have unhealed trauma, which he did, people who have unhealed trauma sometimes will present as a narcissist when they don't actually have the personality disorder, which means, if it's unhealed trauma, then they're absolutely capable of change. But so first part of it was that there were a lot of lies. The second part, and if I'm being totally honest with myself, there was a point where I was like, is this it? Like, I'm not jumping off the walls happy with my life, but there was other people, tons of our friends, including married couples, who were like, you guys have such an amazing relationship. Like, we wish you guys are the perfect couple. We wish that we had what you had. And so I was like, oh, well, I guess this is it then, I guess this is it. And I grew up, in a family that didn't really like strive for greatness. I mean, my family is awesome people, but they weren't like, they were content to like work their Monday to Friday job and then live for the weekend, have their 2 weeks off a year. So I just kind of assumed that like I was just being unreasonable to expect that there should be more in life. And I worried because there were times when I contemplated ending it just because I was like, is this it? I was worried that this was the best I was going to find because of what I was being told, right? Like, if you have married couples who have been married for like 20 years telling you that you have the perfect relationship, and you're like, well, maybe I should leave and see if I can find something else, but I'm already being told I have this perfect relationship, then, I was in Australia. He played for the baseball club that I had initially come down to work for, that I was no longer working for. But all of my friends were in that baseball club. So it was like, if this relationship ended, he's been playing in this baseball club pretty much his entire life. I've only been here for a couple years. So
And for those wondering, she doesn't have an Australian accent. She does. She used to. It was a mix of Australian and Canadian, and it was quite hilarious. We moved her to the South, and now she has a Southern accent. It's awesome.
But yeah, so it was just like, it wasn't just losing a relationship. It was like literally losing like 99% of my friends. I only had like 2 friends outside of the baseball clubs.
Do you feel like
he wasn't friends with?
Like, I can't tell you how many times. Okay, so like there was this girl. I don't even know if I've told you this. There was this girl. So when I moved to Florida in 2000, and I'm not going to say her name or anything like that, but I moved to Florida in 2010, and I moved to Florida to go to grad school, but I was a grad assistant in the athletic program. And, and that's really where I fell in love with digital marketing and online, business and stuff like that, because I started doing it for college sports. And at the time I wanted to be an athletic director until I realized how sharky that industry was, and I got out. But I remember when I moved down there, I met this girl, and ironically, right, it was, it was someone that, was close friends with, my brother, one of my brother-in-laws. And I was like, I forget how they were connected, but anyway, so I met this girl, and like, she was so stuck in this, like, so she was, I'm not going to get on people from Central or Eastern Kentucky, but a lot of people there are like this, and, probably might be where you're at as well. But there was just a lot of weight put on this perception of power, or like this, like, how you're perceived in the world. And this kind of comes from the traumatic experiences that we had in my family, right? Like with my mom and one of my sisters. Like it's not necessarily about what you do, it's about the perception of what you do. So like how people view you based on how you seem on the outside, but there's really like no substance beyond that. So like you're constantly worried about or putting your best foot forward to look the best, even though you might not be the best, or you know what I mean? Like there's that, it's just like this perception. It's about how you look, not about what you do, kind of thing. And anyway, so like she was in college, and I had met her, and like her and I were like, I guess, starting to want to date. And like, I'm this kid who just got in, accepted into grad school. And and I meet her, and like, come to find out, like she was in this relationship with this guy who treated her like, when I say treated her like crap, I'm talking like beat her. Like it wasn't just emotional abuse. Like it was bad. And anyway, and she would tell me about it. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, you allow this to happen? And the reason I brought this up was because I remember her being like, well, if I leave him, I lose all my friends. All my friends are tied to me being in a relationship with this horrible dude. And if I leave him, and this is the really screwed up part, and I think a lot of people get caught in this. If I leave him, I lose my status. I lose not only my friends, but I lose this. And for those of you that have never heard me say this, I will say it today. Status is bullshit. If you literally look up the origin of the word, it's absolute bullshit. Like status.
And hold on, we're not going to
nothing.
shame people. We're not going to shame people for staying in a relationship for that piece, because it's actually a very primal drive that we have.
I get it. But I'm just saying, like, as someone who was looking on the outside, and like I was on the outside and I was just
And somebody whose status used to mean a lot too.
somebody I know, like I used to live in, I didn't say I didn't come from Central Kentucky, so it was definitely rooted in my trauma. But what I'm saying is that, like, I just remember looking on the outside of this, and it was just like, it didn't make any sense to me. But then, like, do you ever notice when you're around people, like, your environment, right? So you put yourself in, like, based on what you were saying, right? Like you were in this environment where, like, it was a toxic environment. And I'm not just talking about your ex, but like the environment are surrounding that relationship, to where like it almost manipulated you to believe that this was okay, even though you knew in your heart that it wasn't okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody was intentionally doing it with like, with like malice. Nobody was like, haha, we're going to screw her over and convince her to stay in this toxic relationship. Nobody else knew that the lies were happening either, right? Until the very end. And so I think that, from a primal perspective, we seek out what's safe, we seek out what's familiar, because familiar equals safe. And so people tend to seek out similar relationships. They call it their type when really it's their pattern. Right. So and I did this for a long time. I jumped from toxic relationship to toxic relationship to toxic relationship. It was like the behavior stayed the same, but the face changed. And it wasn't that that's what I wanted, but that's what felt familiar to me. And then, you get that rush of stress hormones in the relationship and the rush of adrenaline and whatnot. And because that feels familiar, then you assume that that's chemistry. I see this time and time again with my clients who have been in toxic relationships. We do the healing. They are no longer in toxic relationships. They know the healthy relationships to seek out. They get into the healthy relationship and they're like, I'm so freaking bored. This is so boring. There's no chemistry here. There's no passion, because there's no fighting. There's no toxicity. And they have linked the two in their brain, that the toxicity or the fighting or that equals chemistry and passion.
That happened with me with drama. I almost felt like I had to be in drama all the time. It was almost kind of like it kept it interesting. And then when I wasn't in drama, I was like, this is boring. Life's no fun. But then, you know what I mean? Like you kind of almost had to go through that tunnel, and see the other side of things, because like I was so addicted to drama. Like,
so why did you stay in yours?
Well, there was more than one. So you want me to talk about? Well, I mean, like, I guess the big one was my marriage. I mean, my marriage was married for the wrong reasons. Wanted to marry somebody because I felt like it, was A, what I was supposed to do. B, I think so. I was bullied and made fun of a lot growing up. I was different, right? Like I was different. So I had like my own little small group of friends, and then like that was but there was just a lot of like bullying going on, from outside and from inward, right? Like I beat myself up a lot as a kid, and I think a lot of that came. By the way, I think a lot of that came from the toxic relationships and the toxicity that was inside my own family, and then it just sort of like spewed outward. But I ended up getting married at very young, like at 24, 25. So we're looking at like 10, 11 years ago as we're talking, which seems like an entire lifetime ago. Ridiculous. But so I get married, and I just remember like the whole reason I got married was because I thought it was something I was supposed to do. One, and two was because like I married a very good looking Brazilian girl that I met in South Florida, and it was almost kind of like, and again, this goes right back into this Central Kentucky status bullshit that I was dealing with. It was almost kind of like, I'm going to show every single person that said that I wasn't good enough, that made fun of me, like all these things, and it was almost kind of like a trophy. Like at the time, I mean, that was literally kind of like what I lived in. And because I was kind of like there, and I was like, I'm going to show everybody else, like, like they were wrong and I was right, I was willing to put up with like things that I knew were not okay. I got to a point to where, we'd be married, and anybody that knows anything about Latino women, like they'll cook you breakfast in the morning, and then by the afternoon, they're ready to cut you up. Like it can get really, really nasty and gross and scary, with some Latino women. And I was married to someone from Brazil, and they, and not all Brazilians, I'm not saying all Brazilians, but the one I was with, like girl was batshit crazy. And, like I was married with her, and like everything. So, we get married, and instantly I just remember like we got married, and it was very much like a switch. Like it was like just a couple of days later, and I was starting to ask myself, like, what the hell did I just do? Like, why is this happening? Like, this is not like it was a week ago. Like it was very much like that. And I kind of like held on to it because like then it became like, well, I made a mistake, but because I'm holding her up as this trophy, I'm too shameful to let go of the trophy. Like it really became like that for me. And I was unwilling to let go of what I believed. So I was willing to put myself through hidden pain because I was afraid. So this is what was crazy. I mean, this is the crazy part. I would put myself through pain, like literal, not just emotional pain. Like I would get beat up physically. And I put myself through that because I was afraid that the pain would be larger if I let go of the relationship that ended up never happening. In fact, when we got divorced, everybody around me was like, dude, like finally, like we recognized this a long time ago. And I was scared that it was going to be the opposite thing for so long that it literally, like that was probably the biggest reason I stayed in it. And like I think just use that as a lesson, like, you got to do what's like right for you. I think like her cheating on me and her getting pregnant and her like, like doing all the things that she did for me, as crazy as it sounds, like that was one of the best things that ever, it gave me an out, and it forced me to get out of something that I don't know if I would have gotten out of myself.
Yeah. So, I mean, in both of our cases, there was, for you, a fear of being wrong, which didn't feel safe. And for me, a fear of losing all my friends, which also didn't feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's honestly what I believe really drives people to stay in toxic relationships. But the type of toxic relationship that I want to talk about is these ambivalent friendships. And there's actually been studies done on these. So these are like the quote unquote frenemies, right? People who are, you never know what you're going to get with them. Sometimes they're really supportive and really loving. And these can be family members, they can be friends, they can be, you know, significant others.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're really loving and supportive, and sometimes they're like your biggest bully. And there's no in between. It's either, you know, they're love bombing you or they're tearing you down. And there was actually a study done where they went into a corporate office environment and they asked the employees to rate how many of these ambivalent friendships, people that they felt like they had to walk around on eggshells around, how many of these friendships they had in the office place. And then they looked at the person's productivity, the number of sick days they took, things like that. And they found there's a direct correlation. The people who had the higher number of frenemies or ambivalent friends also had higher reported stress rates, took more sick days, were less productive overall, because you're spending so much mental energy looking at, what am I going to get from this person today? Oh, I've got a meeting with Mary Sue later. What is that going to look like? Right? I've got to talk to Billy later. I've got to go to the water cooler and get some water. And Billy's in there. Is he going to be nice to me today? And they spend all this energy, emotional, mental energy, that it makes them sick more often, makes them more stressed out. And then 3, it lowers their overall productivity. And so knowing any friendship that you have that causes you to feel like you need to walk on eggshells, that causes you to feel like, I don't know what I'm going to get today. Any relationship that every single time you walk away from a conversation or like being with that person in person and it leaves you feeling exhausted, those are signs from your body that that may not be a healthy relationship. Now, in some cases, it may just be that you need to set boundaries, or maybe you need to do some of your own healing. But in other cases, it may be that this person is toxic and this is your body's way of telling you, you need to get away from this person.
I think it's important. Like, I heard a quote. I'm not saying this guy is like the perfect guy when it comes to relationships, but the quote was really good. And I heard this from Mike Tyson, and he said, you know, not everybody that's nice to you is your friend. Not everybody that you fight is your enemy, and not everybody that's nice to you is your friend. And I think
That's a good
that's
one.
important because, like, you know, like you talked about with these, make sure I say the word right, ambivalent.
Yep.
I said it right. Yes. We're in Eastern Tennessee, guys. Remember that. So these are big words for me. You know, like when you look at those relationships, right? Like, I think a lot of people have their own agendas. And, you know, one of the things when it comes to these types of relationships, I'm not even going to attempt to say that word again, ambivalent relationships. You know, I think, like, you know, there's going to be a lot of two-faced people out there. And there's going to be a lot of people that will use your, you know, who you are and to try to take advantage. And that happened to me a lot. And I think it's really important to remember that just because someone's being nice to you doesn't mean they're there because they're there to be your friend. And just because someone's fighting you or pushing you, I think me and Tiffany used to say holding our feet to the fire, because Tiffany holds my feet to the fire, I hold her feet to the fire. Sometimes we burn ourselves, but at the end of the day, like that's how we push each other. But at the end of the day, it's not because we're mad at each other or because we don't like each other or because we're enemies. It's because we're pushing ourselves to be the best that we can be. So I think it's really important for us to, you know, take note on, you know, like, just be careful, you know, because these types of people are going to be out there, and, you know, they're people. It's a very toxic and narcissistic thing to do. But believe me when I tell you that there's a lot of those people out there.
Yeah. And so the first thing to do, if you think that you might be in one of these relationships, we always want to do the inner work first. And the foundation for all inner work is regulating and healing the nervous system, which is why we put together the 7-day nervous system reset. It is the 7 most powerful tools to regulate your nervous system, to bring you out of survival mode so that you can truly decide if this is a toxic relationship, if you need to set boundaries, and then you can take the action that you need to take. And so you can get that absolutely free at resetmysystem.com/reset, or go to the show notes.
Just go into the show notes. It might be a little easier for you to go into the show notes or head into the description if you're here on YouTube. And, you know, like go down there and it's going to be right there for you. It's real simple. It's in our custom app. For those of you that don't know, we have a custom app called the Cycle Breakers. You can find on the Apple. My voice just cracked. That's embarrassing. On, you know, the App Store or Google Play. So you could just search Cycle Breakers. But, you know, to get direct access to the 7-day nervous system reset, just click on that link there. It's going to ask you for your email so that we can have an email for you when you download the app. And then these 7 exercises are in the app. So that way, no matter where you go, you don't got to be sitting in front of a big computer like me and Tiffany are sitting in front of right now. You could travel with these exercises in your pocket and come back to them anytime that you need them. That's exactly why we built out the custom app, again, that you can find and download, called the Cycle Breakers, on the App Store or on Google Play, or simply by just clicking on resetmynervoussystem.com/reset down there below in the show notes or the description, and it will download the app automatically for you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We know that if you take action on what we shared today, that it will start making change in your life. We will be back very soon with another interview and episode. Until then, have an amazing day, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Have an amazing week, and get out of those relationships. If you need to get out of them, get out of them if you need to. But use the 7-day nervous system reset to regulate your nervous system while you do it.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Cycle Breakers, where this channel is all about helping people clear out the blocks that are holding them back. We have a free gift for you, and that free gift is called our 7-day nervous system reset. The 7-day nervous system reset is where we help you calibrate your nervous system so you can go out there and control your emotions and start to take more control of your life, helping clear the blocks that are holding you back so you can start stepping into that dream life. It's absolutely free, and you can grab it down here in the description. And remember, our friends, let's dare to heal.